Good day, mate, and welcome back to F1 Brake Check. This is the podcast where we take a deep dive into the past, present, and future of Formula One. In today's episode, Corey and I will have our reactions to the Australian and China weekends, and we'll have an all-new tribute to one of F1's great characters in our biography section. Corey will also twist up my noodle in our Stump the Pundit section, so buckle up, speed freaks. F1 Brake Check is screaming at you at full throttle.
Welcome. You are listening to F1 Brake Check, the epic podcast for all things Formula One, where we discuss technology, history, news, and perspective. With your hosts, Scott Vick and Corey Broom.
All right, we're back with F1 Brake Check. My name is Scott Vick. I am one of your intrepid hosts. With me, as always, is my pundit for life, my ride or die, my brother in arms, Corey Broom. We had to take a couple weeks hiatus for unforeseen reasons, but we're back in action and we're ready to take and do it all for you. Corey, how are you doing this week, sir?
Finally, well, actually, not too bad. I did the world tour. I went to Australia, then I went to UK, and then now back here. And surprisingly, I'm pretty okay with the jet lag. I was terrible yesterday, but today I'm doing all right, man. Yeah, not too bad.
Excellent.
You were off as
Excellent.
well last week. You had some fun down at Disney.
Yep, had some fun down in Florida at Disney, but unfortunately came back with the dreaded Disney flu, which laid me up and forced us to have to postpone last week's recording. So we're finally getting back together, getting back into the swing of things, and I am ready to do it because already we've had a lot of action and we've got lots and lots to talk about.
Definitely.
Definitely. So let's take and jump into our biography. Picture this. The Formula One paddock, a battleground where engineers craft miracles, drivers defy physics, and billionaires play chess with horsepower. Amidst the corporate heads and meticulous engineers, one man stood apart, a showman in a sea of stoics, a gambler who bet on himself and the people around him, and by all accounts won. This is the story of Eddie Jordan, the Irishman who built a Formula One team from nothing, who gave some of the sport's greatest talents their first shot, and who through charm, cunning, and a touch of rock and roll became one of F1's most unforgettable characters. Eddie Jordan wasn't born into motorsport royalty, no silver spoon, no racing pedigree. Born in Dublin in 1948, young Eddie had dreams as wild as the Irish Sea on a stormy day, but racing, that wasn't on the cards, not at first. He trained as an accountant, spending his early career behind a desk crunching numbers in a bank. But the world of finance couldn't contain his restless energy. A move to Jersey in the Channel Islands changed everything. It was there that Eddie discovered karting and, like a moth to a flame, he was hooked. Gone were the spreadsheets and balance sheets. Eddie had found his calling, and it had four wheels. Eddie threw himself into the world of motorsport, climbing the ranks from karting to Formula Ford and even reaching Formula 3. But the brutal truth of racing soon hit. Talent could only take you so far without deep pockets, and deep pockets Eddie did not have. So he pivoted. If he couldn't be the next Jackie Stewart, he'd find the next Jackie Stewart. With an eye for talent and a natural gift for persuasion, he formed Eddie Jordan Racing in 1979. The team became a launchpad for rising stars including Martin Brundle, Jean Alesi, Rubens Barrichello, and Eddie Irvine. By the late 80s, Eddie's hunger had grown. Formula 3 and Formula 3000 were fine, but the real action was in Formula 1, the world of Bernie Ecclestone, Ron Dennis, and Frank Williams, the world of political chess, engineering brilliance, and cutthroat business, and Eddie wanted in. 1991, the grid was set. Ferrari, McLaren, Williams, and there, among the giants, the new kid on the block, Jordan Grand Prix. With an eye-catching green and blue 7-Up livery, the team arrived with a bold attitude and one of the most beautiful Formula One cars ever produced. The Gary Anderson-designed Jordan 191. The team started shaking up the sport with their relentless underdog spirit. In their debut season, they punched above their weight, scoring points and turning heads. But Eddie's biggest masterstroke wasn't just launching a team, it was spotting talent before the rest of the world knew their names. At Spa, Eddie gives a fresh-faced German driver his F1 debut after Bertrand Gachot was jailed. That driver? One Michael Schumacher. Years later, Eddie would joke that he let Schumacher slip through his fingers for pennies as Benetton swooped in after just one race. But that was the essence of Eddie. He played the long game, always looking for the next superstar. But it wasn't just talent spotting that made Jordan Grand Prix unique. It was Eddie himself. He wasn't like the others. He was brash. He was loud. He had no filter, and he did what he pleased. While other teams had polished PR statements, Eddie had stories. Jordan Grand Prix wasn't just an F1 team, it was a circus, and Eddie was the ringleader. The paddock parties were legendary. Sponsors weren't just corporate partners, they were drinking buddies. And as drivers, they were more than just employees. There's a story, perhaps a myth, perhaps true, about Eddie smuggling driver John Lacey out of a contract dispute by hiding him in the trunk of his car. Another tale involves him winning over a major sponsor with a bet over a game of poker. And then, of course, there was 1998 at Spa. A chaotic Belgian Grand Prix saw Damon Hill and Ralf Schumacher running 1-2 for Jordan. Eddie knew that this was his team's best shot at victory. But there was a problem. Ralf Schumacher was hungry, maybe a little too hungry. Eddie got on the radio, delivering a message as only he could. Ralph, for fuck's sake, hold position. Hill took the checkered flag. Jordan Grand Prix had won their first Formula One race. It was a moment of triumph, a testament to the mad Irishman who had taken on F1's elite and won. The team would win 3 more Grand Prix and finish as high as third in the Constructors' Championship in 1999. But Formula One is ruthless. By the early 2000s, Jordan Grand Prix was struggling. The cost of competing skyrocketed. The midfield teams, once able to punch above their weight, found themselves suffocated by the financial muscle as manufacturers started to take over the sport. By 2005, Eddie did the unthinkable. He sold his beloved team. Jordan Grand Prix, which became Midland, then Spiker, then Force India, then Racing Point, and today it's Aston Martin. But Eddie, he was far from done. Many ex-team bosses fade into obscurity. Not Eddie, no chance. He reinvented himself, becoming a TV pundit for the BBC, then Channel 4 and Sky Sports. His unique blend of insider knowledge, Irish wit, and outright mischief made him a fan favorite. One moment he'd be predicting driver moves before anyone else. The next he'd be winding up Christian Horner on live TV. And always he had that twinkle in his eye, as if he knew something the rest of us didn't. And perhaps he did. Eddie Jordan never won a championship in F1. He never built a super team like Ferrari or Mercedes or McLaren. But in the grand story of Formula One, he was one of its greatest characters, a team boss who saw beyond the numbers, a gambler who played with fate and often won, a man who made F1 fun in an era that was becoming increasingly corporate. He gave the sport the Schumachers, Brundle, Barrichello, Frentzen, Irvine, and even the fiery Spaniard Fernando Alonso. He brought flair, madness, and unpredictability. Eddie Jordan passed away last week at the age of 76 after a brutal fight with cancer. Even to the end, in his bright shirts, behind those ever-present sunglasses, you got the feeling that Eddie Jordan was the sharpest guy in the paddock, and not even cancer could dim his spirit. F1 isn't just about winning, it's about the stories. And Eddie, he was one of the best storytellers of them all. Godspeed, Eddie. You will be sorely missed.
I didn't know much about him before now. I knew about Force India and, the history there, the team that he formed. It was really inspiring. I had no idea where he came from, his roots and where he went to.
Yeah, I remember, I had known all of, most of the history of Jordan, simply because, especially in 1991, when they first burst onto the scenes and everything, I hadn't been real familiar with Jordan in the lower tiers as much before they made their foray into F1. But then once they came into F1, and there was a number of articles written in, various publications like Autosport and things like that, and reading those, it was just like, oh my God, this guy is so cool. I mean, this team is operating on, a shoestring, budget, oh, but wait a minute. He gave Brundle his start. Oh, wait a minute. Ayrton Senna was a test driver for him at one point. Wow. I mean, it's like, you look at the stable of drivers that Eddie has had, during his time as a team owner, And I mean, it literally reads like a who's who of some of the greatest names in Formula One. And, not just, you know, establish, I'm sorry, not just, you know, new talent, but also established drivers who, later on wanted to drive for Jordan. I mean, it was like after Hill was so unceremoniously dumped by Williams, after his, two mediocre years at Arrows, he was more than happy to take and join Eddie and jump into the Jordan and everything. And he did, I mean, he did really, really good things. It's like he won 2 races for Jordan. It was, he gave Jordan their first win. But and it's also all the other ones, I mean, that he gave him the starts, to, I mean, even Fernando Alonso got his start in a Jordan.
That's
So
pretty cool.
it's just, and and this, and like I kind of, didn't touch on it, because, I only kind of touched on it and everything, but the parties that Eddie threw were
Yeah.
just absolutely legendary. And I mean, you would have, I mean, by all accounts, he was, a phenomenally wicked drummer. I mean, he could play the skins, I mean, almost, I mean, at a professional level. I mean, he was
Wow.
amazingly good. And they would actually have, he would do like these end of season parties and stuff where he would have, the likes of Damon Hill playing guitar. He would have other drivers playing on other instruments, team owners. It was from by all accounts, these were just absolutely amazing get-togethers. And Eddie was he was, like I said in the biography, he was the ringleader. He was the guy that was always there, always there with a joke. There are so many stories that, about Eddie Jordan that, I mean, we could spend probably 3 or 4 podcasts just talking about the stories about Eddie. Some of them are true, some of them are legend, but
Very true.
he was just one of a kind character. And I had already planned on doing this biography. So, but I had planned on it for later on in the season as we got like closer to Spa and
Hmm.
stuff, because, that's where the legend really truly for Jordan really began, was when they ran Schumacher at Spa and then immediately lost him to Benetton. And I had planned on doing this biography then, and then unfortunately, we lost him last week.
Yeah, right, right.
And so it was one of those things that I felt like it was time to let the world know about what an amazing character that Eddie Jordan really was.
Nice, nice.
So now we have the return of my absolute favorite part of the show. Corey, it is time to play Stump the Pundit. So, for those of you who are just joining us for the first time, or maybe haven't been listening for very long, I am a longtime fan of Formula One. I've been watching Formula One since 1985. Corey, on the other hand, is a more relatively new fan to the sport, only having come in about 7 or 8 years ago. So every week, Corey comes up with a series of trivia questions to take and test my knowledge of the sport of Formula One. So, Corey, what do you have for me this week?
So with I know we're going to get into this later, but with the advent of Lawson and his possibility of getting dropped, I thought, well, why not talk about or have questions about people that are in his similar situation, but actually overcame the odds and stayed with that team. So here we go. Uh, which F1 team almost dropped Sergio Perez at the end of 2020? But then he went and won his first Grand Prix.
That would be Racing Point.
Racing Point. Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, he won that and then went over to Red Bull.
Yep, he impressed Christian and
Yeah.
Helmet so much that when his contract was due up at Racing Point, they swooped in and signed him, which was very unusual at the time because most of the almost because I think that he was I think he was either the first or second driver ever to go to drive a Red Bull that had not been part of Red Bull's racing academy.
Oh, wow. Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Second question. Which Ferrari driver was nearly replaced in 2019, but secured his place with an impressive debut season?
That would be Leclerc.
Yeah, 2019, exactly right.
Uh-huh.
Which world champion was almost dropped by McLaren early in his career for not securing any sponsorship?
That would be one Sir Lewis Hamilton back before he was Sir Lewis
Yeah,
Hamilton.
yeah, 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 yeah.
But yeah, he was there was because Hamilton really was kind of the last of, or one of the few people drivers in the modern era who has been able to make it to the pinnacle of their chosen uh form of motorsport, who was able to do it mostly on talent alone.
Yeah,
It's very, very, very difficult. You have to be really a truly once in a generational talent to make it to the pinnacle of motorsport just strictly on talent.
right.
And Lewis was one of the few who was able to do that because he did not unlike even Alonso and Vettel, they still came from somewhat wealthy families who were able to in part fund their racing as they came up through the lower tiers. And but Lewis Hamilton, been very well documented that his father worked, at times sometimes worked three jobs just in order
Yeah,
to take and help fund Lewis's racing in karting and everything and in the lower tiers and stuff. So, his family sacrificed a tremendous amount. And so when he came into Formula One, he was expected to, take and help provide a certain amount of sponsorship. And he had some issues with that because up to that point he had been operating on a shoestring budget,
yeah,
and doing it all just on sheer talent. And but it was Ron Dennis who stepped in and said,
yep,
he never wavered on his support for Hamilton. And so once he had made it to McLaren, and especially after his first year, there was no question that the kid, after nearly winning the championship as a rookie, there was no question that he was never going anywhere.
right.
Unless he really had a drop off in form, which never happened. So
Yep, yep. And that's it for the return
okay,
of Stump the Pundit.
awesome, love it, fantastic. All right, so let's get into news. So first of all, we're going to have our Australia and China reactions, or in some cases, overreactions. So first thing I'm going to pose to you, Corey, is McLaren are going to run away with the title, and they're going to pull a Red Bull and win 22 or 23 races this season. Your thoughts?
For me, it's just so hard for because we've only had two races so far, and we've had obviously one sprint race. So right now, yes, it looks that way, but we've seen so many times at halfway point last year, halfway point, Red Bull this time last year, Red Bull was going to run away with it yet again. And midway
Mm-hmm.
through, teams figured out, McLaren being one of those, figured out what was going on, and they beat the hell out of Red Bull the rest of the season. So right now, yes, early on, but I wouldn't hold that to be true, say midway through.
Nope. I am going to totally agree with you. I think that is a, complete and utter overreaction.
Yeah.
I don't believe, it's just, I think that it's just McLaren has been fortunate. They've had a little bit of things break their way for a change, whereas it hasn't broken Ferrari's way. Although, Lewis had, and actually I'm going to hold off on that thought until we get to our next item. But, things just haven't broken the same way for, Ferrari and Red Bull and Mercedes the way that they have for McLaren
Yeah.
through the first two races. Although there has been some blips and some stuff that, would definitely make you think that it is not the case, and I think that is a gross overreaction that McLaren are going to run away with the title. I think by midway through this, by the summer break, it's probably going to be one of the tightest championship fights in a very, very long time.
Yeah.
That's my thoughts on this
Yeah.
on that.
I agree.
Okay, so second thing, Lewis made a huge mistake going to Ferrari.
Again, it's too early to tell. Uh, he won the sprint race. He looked fantastic in a sprint race,
Exactly.
and I would say he looked fairly good in China before his DQ. But it, again, it's too early to tell. I've heard people one camp say that Lewis made this huge mistake. How could he? He's not going to ever, amount of anything in Ferrari. And then I've heard the complete opposite of this is his year. He's going to win the 8th title. Blah blah blah. And we're 2 races in. It's way too early to tell. Knowing Ferrari, it's not going to be, if Lewis doesn't do well, I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's probably not going to be Lewis's fault. It's probably going to be strategy. It happens to Ferrari every time. But, again, I think he looks good. He learned a lot from Albert Park. And then you can see that transition over to China. So, again, it just remains to be seen. Let's give him 5 or 6 races before we say, hey, he made a mistake, or he might win this 8th title. I think it's too early.
No,
we're not Red Bull.
I am. Yes, this is this is another complete overreaction, because especially a lot of people were saying that after the less than stellar showing of Melbourne for Ferrari, China was, a complete 180. I mean, you had Charles Leclerc finish the race with missing a complete end plate, lost it literally at the first corner and raced the entire race and looked really strong, even with a broken end plate on his front wing.
Yeah.
So Ferrari, after, Melbourne by no means was a huge disappointment. It just wasn't what people were expecting right out of the gate.
Yeah.
And I think that even Ferrari weren't expecting, things to, to break kind of the way that they did, but they looked outstanding. I mean, they came off the plane in China, looked really, really good.
Yeah.
In the fact that, I mean, like you just mentioned, he ends up, taking a very convincing pole for the sprint race, led wire to wire at the sprint race, so, I mean, they looked really good. And it was only because of a couple little tweaks and some things that just happened to break because of the weather conditions, that maybe, the McLaren's just a little bit better in, the damp as opposed to the Ferrari. And a couple of things broke and just slightly different, and Ferrari would have been right there on top for, qualifying for the main Grand Prix as well. So right. I think this is a complete overreaction. I think Ferrari are going to look really strong. And the thing is, though, is that this is only, like you said, this is only 2 races in, The thing is, though, is that, I had completely forgotten about this until about 2 weeks ago, when a article came out, and I forget where it was at. I want to say it was Motorsport, but I'm not sure. But one of the major news outlets published a retrospective story that a lot of people forget, that Lewis and Fred Vasseur at Ferrari have a long history together, in the fact that they won a championship together when Lewis was still in F3. And I had completely forgotten about that, that they had I knew that they went way back, but I've forgotten about him winning the F3 championship with, Fred Vasseur running the show there and stuff. So it's like, they're still, he's still getting used to the car. That's, again, I'm going to jump, I'm going to try not to jump on my soapbox too much about, the lack of preseason testing, especially because not only does it catch out the rookies, but it even catches out the veterans when they're switching teams, because, the buttons on the steering wheel are different. I mean, he can work with the team, and he can kind of get it, to his liking and everything. But there are certain things that are still going to map differently between, that are going to be different between the Ferrari and the Mercedes, that he has to come to terms with. And with the lack of running on, in the real world, it does make it more difficult. So it's going to take him probably, I would say it's going to take at least four races, four
Yeah.
race weekends before Lewis is going to be able to fully unlock all the potential from the Ferrari. But
Right.
once he does, watch out.
Yeah.
So let's move on to our next item. So, next reaction. Antonelli is the real deal.
I kind of agree on this one.
I thought for sure he was going to flame out
Oh,
in
same here.
spectacular
Oh,
fashion.
I did too.
We both made that prediction at the beginning of the season, and I gotta
Ooh,
say, I
man.
am quite impressed in what
Yeah.
Antonelli has done. He is really showing
Right.
maturity beyond his age.
Oh my gosh. It was the first race in Australia that, my gosh, looking at that kid, well, I would say kid, watching him race and just how good he was. And then,
Yeah,
over in China, I can't believe how close he is to Russell. And
yeah,
Russell is looking fantastic this year. Again, we're
yes,
only two races in. So far, he's looking really, really good. He's whatever demons that he had as far as that those getting really twitchy around people, he seems to have conquered those. So
yeah,
in the last couple of races, he looks really, really solid. Anyway,
yeah.
that's
Well, I
that's a
mean,
diversion. But you were saying Antonelli?
yeah,
Oh,
with
yeah,
Antonelli, yeah,
yeah.
with Antonelli, I mean, it's like I mean, he started, he didn't have, in the changing conditions at Australia, you know, he, didn't qualify well, but then, in the rain, he takes and he goes from 16th on the grid and ends up finishing fourth in his very first race. And albeit, the wet weather kind of helped, and everything, and also the fact that, a number of more high profile, drivers, ended up not even finishing. But, and then after the first race, I thought, okay, well, let's see how he does in China. And then we get to China and it's like, holy crap.
Yeah. No, I know. It's crazy.
Yes.
Out of all the new rookies, I would say that he's one of the top ones. I would say that even he's one of the top ones on the grid now, even with the veterans.
Yeah. So I'm kind of starting to think that, that maybe Toto was right.
I know.
I didn't give
I know. I didn't give him credit at all. I was laughing about it, like, oh man, Toto, you're gonna regret this midway through the season. Because I
no.
wanted him to pick Botas.
True, but at the end of the day, though, I do think that they made
Yeah.
the right choice. Now, am I saying he's not going to have he's
Oh
not going
yeah,
to
of
have
course.
some typical rookie issues where later on this season, he might have a couple of bad races, he might have a few bad qualifying sessions, he
Everybody
might make a
does.
few
Yeah.
kind of boneheaded mistakes.
Yep.
That's to be expected from a rookie of any
Exactly.
caliber,
Yeah.
whether but I don't know. I'm starting to think that, yeah, maybe he is the real deal.
Right on.
All right. So, next thing, Liam Lawson is already in trouble.
Man, I I keep hearing that he is in trouble, man. Like he could be
I've heard
replaced
this.
really soon, as far as maybe even Japan type. The problem is, and we've talked about this before. You know, the problem is they promoted him too early, which is a disservice to him. And we both said
Mhm.
this last year. That's the biggest problem is that they promoted this person, Lawson, who's a phenomenal driver. Take nothing away from him from the way he's driving that Red Bull. But by all accounts, that Red Bull is designed around one person, Max Verstappen,
Mhm.
and that Red Bull is really designed and geared towards him, and that means that literally anybody else besides Max is going to have a really tough time. The only exception to that we saw was Checo. He came in
Well,
and raced phenomenally. Now he did burn out later, but I just don't understand how you can look at this person this driver that you promoted after 11 races, thought was so phenomenal, and how you just don't give him at least to mid-season, at least to mid-season. I would say you should give him at least a season under his belt. Anyway, what do you say?
Well, I'm like you. I thought that, they made the wrong choice in promoting him in the first place, because you're right. Checo was one of the few drivers who was actually able to be on par with Verstappen. Now, the only driver that was able to regularly beat Verstappen in the exact same car was Daniel Ricciardo.
Yep.
He, quite regularly was outperforming Verstappen. And had he stayed at, Red Bull instead of jumping to Renault, I really think that he would have won at least one world championship. He would have already been at least a one-time,
Yeah.
world champion if he had stuck with it. But we're not gonna we've hashed, Ricardo's,
Few times.
fall from grace, more than once. So I'm not gonna rehash that today. But yeah, I still think that, putting Lawson in the car over Yuki, one was a mistake right away, because Yuki has, I do think that because of their driving styles, I do think that Yuki would have performed much, much better in the car. Um, but so yeah, I definitely, I'm hearing the same rumors that you are, that he might be replaced as early as Japan, especially being Yuki's home race. And to be perfectly honest with you, I would not be surprised if they don't at least say, hey, for this one race, we're going to put Yuki in the car to see how he does, and then compare the two, and then depending upon if Yuki goes out there and lays a giant turd on home soil, then they might switch him back, but that second seat at Red Bull, I definitely think is going to be a game of musical chairs for this season.
Man,
I really do.
I'm looking at Yuki and then looking at Lawson. I mean, you can put Yuki in now. The thing that upset me about the whole thing is Yuki has the experience as far as being able to deal with the tremendous pressure and everything like that, what we've talked about before. Now, replacing Lawson with Yuki at this point, I don't think is going to do anything. I don't think Yuki is going to do any better than Lawson.
Really?
Yeah, I don't see it. He'll be able to manage the stress better, but as far as pure driving capabilities of those two, I think they're pretty comparable. So I don't know. I don't see putting Yuki in is going to make Yuki like be top of the grid. I just don't see it, especially in 2 or 3 races. I don't see it. Now maybe he won't be 20th, but I don't see him being up there in the points and helping Max out and helping the team out, which is really what they're wanting, is somebody that can at least make points so they don't have to rely on one driver. What about you?
I'd say I'm going to disagree with you that though, because I mean, it's, you've got Yuki in a racing bull has consistently outperformed Lawson in the Red Bull, so even being in the junior team, and Yuki is still outperforming him. And, if it weren't for, I mean, again, it's another situation of, bad luck, bad strategy, things like that, Yuki had a ran really well at Australia, had a decent sprint in China. Unfortunately, he had his, troubles on race day, that relegated him, to, back of the grid and a lap down and everything, but he had a phenomenal qualifying effort at China, for the Grand Prix, qualified 5th on the grid, had, had a disastrous day. But, that's the whole thing, is it's like, even in what is a quote unquote inferior car, Yuki is outperforming Liam. And so that's why I really think that, because of their, differing driving styles, I really do think that Yuki will go much better once he's given a chance to slot into the Red Bull. So, but I mean, time will tell.
Yeah. Sooner
All
than
right.
later, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So, all
Next
right.
one.
So next, Williams is at the top of the midfield this season.
I mean, so again, going back to we're only 2 races in plus a sprint race. They're looking much better than they did last year.
Yes.
Sainz is another one that needs to get used to that car, because
Hmm.
Albon's looking good. He's up there. Sainz will get there, no doubt about it. He just needs to get a little bit more comfortable and more familiar with that car. But I hope I would really love to see Williams be a lot more competitive and be at the top of the grid. Well, maybe not the top of the grid, but top of the midfield. We'll put it that way. I would love
Yep.
to see that.
Yep. And I really right now at the moment, I would say that Williams is the team to beat at the top of the midfield.
Yeah,
Although, you've got Alpine has looked, has looked really strong. Lawrence, or I'm sorry, Lawrence, not Lawrence. Lance Stroll looked really good in Australia, during the race. I mean, brought it home, a very well-deserved sixth in Australia. He still, got points in China,
yeah,
so I mean, but I really do, but if you go just strictly on qualifying, yeah, absolutely. Williams is at the top of the midfield. I mean, it's
right.
like both, Alex Albon has made it into Q3 at both races and at the sprint, so they are looking really strong, and I think that was a big reason why even Val said during one of the pre-race interviews that he did on Sky Sports that that was part of the reason why Sainz came to Williams was things that Val's had shown him, the things that they were doing behind the scenes and under the covers and everything
Yeah,
that was going to make Williams really stand out this season, and that's what excited Sainz and what made him, what helped him to decide to come to over to Williams. And so I really do. I think that Williams is really, until further notice, I would say Williams is definitely at the top of the midfield.
right. Yeah, I totally agree.
Okay. Yep. All right. So next thing, the sprint format sucks and it needs to be scrapped.
Uh, yeah, I go back and forth on this one because you know, there's points where I really like watching the sprint race because it's a race, albeit a smaller race. It gives more points, so it's a little bit more exciting at the end of the season. I love all those aspects, but the counter to that obviously is it reduces the amount of practices that they have. They're not as competitive because of that as a result. So I'm 50-50, man. I can go either way on this.
I think the sprint, we've talked about this before,
Yeah,
and I think we all know where I stand on it. I liked the sprint format back when the sprint actually, not just beyond the points, but the sprint actually meant something as far as the race.
yeah,
My whole problem with the sprint is when they changed the format where the sprint race didn't have anything to do with the Grand Prix. I think that caused the drivers and the teams to take a much more conservative approach to the sprint, which has made them a little more boring. And
yeah,
I also don't like the fact that the way that it breaks up the weekend. I liked it
yeah,
back. I
yeah,
liked it better back when previously when we would have a practice sprint qualifying, you would have the sprint race, and then the sprint race would actually dictate your starting position for the Grand Prix. And so, but then we also had another practice session. And I think that one of the biggest problems that I have with the sprint is taking away that second practice session, because now you only get one practice session in the course of the weekend, and then you go straight to sprint qualifying, sprint, and then you have another qualifying session for the Grand Prix.
yeah.
I just don't think that really I don't think it's good for the teams. I don't think it's good for, especially for the rookie drivers or
Right.
for the drivers who did switch teams during the offseason. So I really think that either they need to scrap the sprints altogether and go back to the same format every weekend, or they need to go back to the previous sprint, you know, uh, format where the sprint, dictated your finishing position on the Grand Prix, or yeah, your starting position for the Grand Prix. So
Yeah.
that's my 2 cents, and I will get down off my soapbox about that again for the 15th time.
Gotcha.
All right, so let's talk real quickly about Ferrari and Gasly's disqualification. So we had Lewis and Charles Leclerc both got disqualified from the results in China because Leclerc was 1 kilogram underweight, and Lewis was disqualified because the plank, which we have talked about a number of times on this show, was 1 millimeter worn more than what was allowed by the rules. And that was also the same thing that caught out Pierre Gasly.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Leclerc first. Okay, so he was 1 kilogram underweight, and people say, well, it's because he lost the end plate of the the wing, and that's what caused it to be underweight. Well, no, that wasn't the case, because Ferrari were allowed to fit a new front wing to the car for during the post-race inspection to prove, and even then they were still 1 kilogram underweight. So the rules are pretty cut and dried there and stuff. And so apparently they miscalculated. It's pure and simple.
Right. Horrible for Ferrari, because now that they have no points as a team or as drivers. So
yes. So that has definitely put them behind the 8 ball, in the championship. Now, again, like I said, I think that, we're definitely going to have, a very tight, finish, by midseason. They're going to be, it's going to be tight, but the fact that they're, on par right now with Williams, standing in, they're tied for 4th in the constructors. It's, this hurt. It hurt a lot, because it's now put them almost 20 points behind Red Bull in 3rd place, and they have much higher aspirations that they are going to have to really knuckle down. But the thing is, though, is that this is not your father's Ferrari of old. Under Vasseur, Ferrari doesn't make the same mistakes twice, and they will learn from this, and they are going to knuckle down, and they are going to do everything that they possibly can to give Lewis and Charles the absolute best car that they can to take and try to close up that gap to McLaren and Mercedes. So I don't see them being down for long. This hurt, especially, because they did have a good points haul, during the Grand Prix, and losing those points, that hurts. So now that it just means that they've got to knuckle down. All right. So I think that we're about done with our reactions and overreactions for this week. What do you think?
I think so.
Okay. So that's all the time we have for this week. Join Corey and I next week when we will have an all-new episode. We'll have an all-new history lesson, more brain-twisting trivia, and much, much more. So until next time, he's Corey. I'm Scott. We are the pundits of F1 Brake Check. Let's go!
Thank you for listening to F1 Brake Check. If you have enjoyed what you heard, don't miss a single episode by hitting that subscribe button in your favorite podcatcher, or you can watch the video version on YouTube. Help us grow by sharing us with your friends and fellow F1 fans. You can contact us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok and X at F1 Brake Check. Our website is f1brakecheck.com, where you will find links to all our content. We value your passion and your feedback, so please take a moment to review our podcast. Your reviews help us grow and improve, and it means the world to us. Share your thoughts, rate us, and let us know how we can make the show experience even better. F1 Brake Check is a production of Brake Check Media. For your hosts Scott Vick and Corey Broom, until next time, keep yourself inside track limits, and try not to pitch it in the kitty litter.